In 1853, among the ruins of a dead city in what is now Iraq, archaeologists pulled 12 clay tablets from the dust. They were covered in a language almost no one in the world could read. Nearly 20 years passed before one man managed to translate them, and when he did, the room fell silent. It was the story of a king everyone believed was invented. Word by word, that king had existed. And he is not the only one. For centuries, we filed away as fantasy tales that someone actually lived, saw, and told as best they could. Today, you are going to learn about 8 legends that clay, sea, and science ended up confirming. Some will surprise you, but stay until number 1. That one not only turned out to be real, it is the one that will make you look at every legend you have ever heard with different eyes. Let's begin. Number 8. Gilgamesh, the king who truly existed. You already know the story, even if you don't know that you know it. A king so powerful they said he was 2/3 God, a man who fought monsters, crossed oceans, and searched to the end of the world for the secret of eternal life. A story so ancient, so exaggeratedly detailed, that scholars put it in a drawer and moved on. Myth, just another tale. Except there was a problem. Those 12 tablets from Nineveh were not loose poetry. They were the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest texts ever written by a human being, older than the Iliad by more than 1,000 years. And as translators progressed, they found something that froze their blood. The poem described a flood that destroyed the world, a man who built a boat, animals brought on in pairs, a dove released to search for dry land, an account identical to Noah's Ark, written centuries before the Bible. But the real blow came later, because among the lists of kings that the ancient Sumerians carved in stone, the so-called Sumerian king list, a specific name appears. Gilgamesh, king of the city of Uruk. Not a god, a flesh and blood king who would have ruled around the year 2700 BC. And Uruk was also real. Archaeologists unearthed it in southern Iraq, a city with enormous walls, exactly the walls that the poem attributes to Gilgamesh, built, according to the text, by order of the king himself. Here, precision matters. That a king named Gilgamesh existed does not mean he fought monsters, nor that he found immortality. That part remains legend. But the man, the city, the walls, the flood in his people's memory, all of that was real. The problem with the word coincidence is that it is comfortable, and comfort has a flaw. It stops you just before asking the next question. Because if the oldest story ever written, the one that every generation of scholars dismissed as pure fantasy, hides a real king, a real city, and a real flood, what does that tell you about the next legend everyone rushed to discard? Number 7. Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands. For centuries, if a story could not be unearthed with a common shovel, historians put a label on it and closed the case. Fable. And few stories were dismissed as harshly as that of Ubar. According to ancient writings and Bedouin folklore, Ubar was a fabulously wealthy city hidden deep in the sands of the Arabian Peninsula, a commercial power built on a single trade, frankincense, a resin that in the ancient world came to be worth more than gold. It was said that its inhabitants became so arrogant, so corrupt, that the entire city was swallowed by the sand as punishment, vanished, without leaving a trace, a perfect story to frighten travelers, too perfect to be true. Except that, in the early 90s, a group of researchers did something no Bedouin had been able to do. They looked at the desert from space. Using satellite images and NASA radar, they managed to see what was invisible at ground level. Ancient caravan routes, erased centuries ago, that all converged on the same lost point in the Oman Desert. Hundreds of paths pointing to the same place like the lines of a spider web. Something important had been there. They excavated and found the ruins of a fortress with towers, a settlement built next to a water well right on the ancient frankincense routes. But the most disturbing part was why the city had disappeared. The settlement was built over an enormous limestone cavern, and at some point, the roof of that cavern collapsed. The city literally sank into the earth, swallowed by the ground, exactly as the legend said. Here, honesty matters. There are archaeologists who debate whether this site is the Ubar of the tales, or simply an important caravan post. That debate remains open. But what no one disputes anymore is that at that exact point in the desert, where tradition said there was a city swallowed by sand, there really was a city, and the earth really swallowed it. The desert kept the secret for 1,000 years. It took going to space to find it. Number 6. Heracleion, the city swallowed by the sea. The Greek historian Herodotus, 2,500 years ago, wrote about a magnificent port city at the mouth of the Nile, a city where, according to him, Heracles himself had been, a city of colossal temples, merchants from all over the Mediterranean, ships loaded with gold. He called it Heracleion. The problem is that no one could find it, not a stone, not a column. For centuries, it was assumed that Herodotus, as so often, had exaggerated or simply invented a ghost city from a writer with too much imagination. Except Herodotus had invented nothing, only the city was not where anyone thought to look. It was underwater. In the year 2000, an underwater archaeologist and his team were surveying the Bay of Abukir off the coast of Egypt when their instruments detected shapes on the seabed. They went down, and what the darkness gave back left them speechless. Statues 5 meters tall, still standing on the seabed, temple columns, stone blocks with inscriptions, dozens of ancient sunken ships, jewels, gold coins, tablets with writing, an entire city, complete, frozen in time several meters below the surface, intact, waiting. It was Heracleion, exactly where the sea had hidden it. The inscriptions confirmed the name without a doubt. The city had been for centuries Egypt's main port to the Greek world, an immensely wealthy metropolis, and at some point, more than 1,000 years ago, a combination of earthquakes, rising sea level, and soil that liquefied under its own weight made it slide entirely to the bottom of the Mediterranean. No one was left to tell the tale. Only Herodotus remained, whom for centuries we called a liar. Think about that for a second. A city we considered pure Greek myth spent more than 1,000 years intact, in silence, underwater. A few kilometers from a coast we traveled millions of times, waiting, and no one looked down. How many others are still waiting? Number 5. King Midas, the man behind the gold. We all know the curse. A king so greedy he asked that everything he touched turned to gold, and the gods, cruel, granted it. His food, his wine, even his own daughter were transformed into cold metal. A fable about greed perfect for teaching children a lesson, a moral tale, nothing more. Except that Midas existed. Not the magic touch, that is legend, but the king, the man with that name, truly ruled. He was called Midas. He was king of Phrygia in what is now Turkey, and he reigned around the 8th century BC. How do we know with such certainty? Because he does not appear only in Greek myths. He appears in the records of the Assyrian Empire, one of the most obsessively bureaucratic civilizations in history, which mentions him by name as a powerful and real king with whom they had dealings. And then there is his tomb. In 1957, archaeologists excavated a giant mound in the ancient Phrygian capital, Gordion. They dug through tons of earth and stone until they reached a sealed wooden chamber intact that had been closed for more than 2,700 years. Inside, they found the skeleton of a man about 60 years old, surrounded by the richest royal burial goods of his time. Many believe those bones belonged to Midas himself or his father. And the gold, that part also has a real root. Phrygia was famous for its wealth, and through its lands ran a river, the Pactolus, whose waters carried natural gold nuggets. The Phrygians became immensely wealthy collecting that gold from the riverbed, a king whose kingdom literally pulled gold from water. See how it works? The legend did not come from nowhere. It took a real king from a real kingdom famous for real gold and added magic. The fable is the shell. Inside there was always a man who existed. Number 4. El Dorado, the man of gold, killed thousands. Spanish conquistadors, English explorers, adventurers from all over the world ventured into the jungles of South America and died of fever, hunger, and arrows, chasing a name: El Dorado, the lost city made entirely of gold. And they never found it, for a very simple reason. El Dorado was never a city. It was a man. Here the story becomes fascinating because the truth is stranger than fantasy. The Europeans got it all wrong. El Dorado did not refer to a golden place, but to a gilded person. And that person existed in what is now Colombia, in the heart of the Muisca people. The ritual was this. When a new Muisca chief assumed power, they took him to a sacred lagoon high in the mountains, Lake Guatavita. There they would strip the future chief and cover his entire body with gold dust until he gleamed like a living statue beneath the sun. Then they would place him on a raft, take him to the center of the lagoon, and from there he would throw offerings of gold and emeralds into the waters as tribute to the gods. The Golden Man, El Dorado. For centuries, this sounded like an invention of the conquistadors to justify their greed. Until, in a cave near the town of Pasca, someone found an object that changed everything. A small piece of gold, exquisite, of Muisca metalwork, a miniature raft with a larger central figure surrounded by companions, the exact scene of the ritual. Cast in gold by the Muisca themselves centuries before any European arrived. Today, that golden raft is one of the most treasured pieces in South America. Physical proof that the ceremony of the Golden Man was not a European fantasy. It was real. And the most ironic part of all, generations of Europeans died searching for a city of gold that did not exist without realizing that the truth, a king covered in gold throwing treasures into a sacred lagoon, was even more incredible than the lie they pursued. Number 3. The Tartaria tablets. An impossible script. This is the one that makes experts nervous, and you will understand why. In 1961, in a small village called Tartaria, in what is now Romania, an archaeologist was excavating a Neolithic site when she unearthed 3 small clay tablets. They were modest, about the size of the palm of a hand, but they were covered with symbols, marks deliberately engraved, ordered, that did not look like decoration. They looked like writing. And there was the problem, because according to everything we believed we knew, the oldest writing in humanity had been born in Mesopotamia, in Sumer, around the year 3400 before Christ. That was the sacred datum, the foundational brick of history. Civilization begins with writing, and writing begins in Sumer. But some analyses dated the context of the Tartaria tablets to an even older time, possibly centuries earlier than Sumerian script, which left on the table an uncomfortable possibility that in the heart of Europe, people we considered primitive were engraving symbols before the Sumerians invented theirs. This is where I have to slow down and be honest with you, because that is exactly what a good researcher would do. This is far from settled. There is a real and serious debate among specialists. Some maintain that these symbols are genuine writing, an unknown and ancient system. Others, with solid arguments, say they are religious or ownership symbols, not a complete language. And the exact dating of the tablets is also disputed. I am not going to sell you a certainty that does not exist. But this much is true, and nobody disputes it. The tablets are real, they are ancient, and the symbols are there, engraved, waiting for an explanation that, after more than 60 years, still has not fully arrived. And that possibility alone that the story of how we learned to write may not have begun where they told us is enough to keep more than one expert awake at night. 2. Lake Titicaca, the temple beneath the water. High in the Andes, at almost 4,000 meters altitude between Peru and Bolivia, there is an immense lake of an impossible blue. Lake Titicaca and the peoples who live on its shores have, since forever, the same legend. They say that long before the Incas there existed an advanced civilization that lived in these lands, that they committed some offense or a great catastrophe arrived and their cities were swallowed by the waters. A lost city at the bottom of the sacred lake, the typical tale told from generation to generation that serious people file away as Andean mythology. Except that in the year 2000, a scientific expedition went down to search and found something. Several meters below the surface, in the frozen waters of Titicaca, divers found structures, remains of a temple, a stone wall hundreds of meters long, agricultural terraces, roads, human constructions clearly, submerged at the bottom of the highest navigable lake in the world, made by human hands, under the water. Think about what that means. Those terraces and those walls could only have been built when they were on dry land. That is, when the level of the lake was dramatically lower than today. Someone raised all that, lived there, cultivated there, and then the water rose and covered everything, just as the legend said. Now, the usual caution, because this is where many exaggerate. These structures exist, that is beyond question. They were photographed, they were documented. What continues to be investigated is exactly what era they are from and what culture they belong to. They are probably linked to the Tiwanaku civilization, a real and advanced Andean culture that flourished in this area. There is no need to invent anything extraterrestrial. The truth is already extraordinary enough. A forgotten civilization built on the shores of this lake, and the water swallowed it. The legend said there was something beneath Titicaca. The legend was right, and the lake has not yet finished showing everything it hides. 1. Atlantis, the real core of the greatest myth of all. And we arrive at the mother of all legends, the one that for 2,400 years obsessed explorers, scientists, dreamers, and charlatans alike. Atlantis. You already know the story. An island civilization, powerful and advanced beyond its time, that in a single terrible day and night disappeared beneath the sea, swallowed by the waves. The Greek philosopher Plato told it more than 2,000 years ago, and since then we have not stopped searching for it. So I am going to be direct with you because I promised you from the beginning. Atlantis, just as Plato described it, a huge continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, almost certainly did not exist. There is no sunken continent there. On that, the skeptics are right, and to deny it would be selling you smoke. But, and this is an enormous but, that does not mean Plato invented everything from nothing, because there is a real case, documented, brutal, that fits the story in a way that raises goosebumps. Around the year 1600 before Christ, on an island in the Aegean Sea called Thera, now Santorini, there was a dazzling civilization. They were the Minoans, or a people closely linked to them, the most advanced culture in Europe at the time. They had palaces of several floors, running water, plumbing, exquisite art, a fleet that dominated the Mediterranean, a maritime power, brilliant and sophisticated. Exactly the type of civilization that Plato describes. And then the island exploded. The volcanic eruption of Thera was one of the most violent in the history of humanity. It blew the center of the island into the air. It generated colossal tsunamis that crashed against the coasts of Crete. The heart of the Minoan world, more than 100 kilometers away, in a matter of hours, one of the most advanced civilizations on the planet received a blow from which it never recovered. An entire culture, powerful and refined, sunk by the sea and fire in an instant. Sound familiar? An advanced island, a maritime power, a sudden catastrophe from the water. A civilization erased almost overnight. This is where caution matters, so let us be clear. Nobody can prove that Plato was thinking of Thera when he wrote about Atlantis. It is a hypothesis, not a closed fact, but it is a hypothesis that takes the most impossible legend of all and finds, beneath it, a perfectly real skeleton. An advanced civilization that truly existed and truly disappeared beneath the waters in a catastrophe. And that is the idea I want to leave you with, the one that connects the 8 stories of today. Every time we hear a legend too incredible to be true, our first reflex is to dismiss it, say myth, put it in a drawer and move along. But the drawer was full of real kings, of real cities under the sea, of real rituals of gold, and of real catastrophes. Again and again, the people who lived thousands of years ago left us the truth written in their stories. Only they told it with the words they had, and we, too comfortable, too sure we know everything, stopped listening. The next time someone tells you that something is just a legend, perhaps it would be wise to ask what they truly saw. These were 8, but the drawer of discarded legends is far from empty. There are dozens more stories waiting for the next shovel, the next diver, or the next satellite to confirm them. Here, in Hidden Archive, we continue unearthing what time tried to erase. Until the next file.